I'm going to record from now onwards, and I would like to welcome you to this session. It's actually the penultimate session of the year for the term, but this is also my great pleasure to present a part of the World Christianity series, which we visited in the past, but actually in this series we haven't done yet, namely the Central Asian part. And this is, of course, where you have the Church of the East, who is gradually expanding into China at this very moment in time that we're going to be looking at today. It's my great pleasure and honor to have a PhD candidate from Oxford with us, Benjamin Sharkey, who I listened to at a very different conference. We can talk about that later, but I thought the topic fitted in very well with the theme of our series. And I would like to turn the word now to pass it on to Benjamin, who will be talking about his own PhD research. So if you would like to share you have already shared your screen. So if you would like to start any point now, so we can take questions later.
Thank you so much. This is a amazing opportunity to be able to share my research with you all. I'm really looking forward to your feedback as well. I'm going to aim to try and talk for about 30 minutes, maybe spilling over slightly, but not much longer than 35. If there's any technical problems at any point, please do interrupt me, because I've had a few Wi-Fi issues here. But yeah, let's get started. Thank you all for being here. So in this paper, I will be exploring the evidence for nomadic Turkic conversions to East Syrian Christianity. And I'll be asking the question, why did these nomadic groups choose to convert to Christianity? The history of the Church of the East, sometimes called Nestorian, is one that has been greatly neglected, especially considering its significance to both the history of Christianity and of Asia. The Church of the East rose out of the context of the Sasanian Persian Empire in the first 2 centuries after Christ. Separated from the Western and European churches by the continual conflict of the Persian and Roman empires, it was formed of East Syriac and Persian communities, and its Christian expression was decidedly non-Western. These communities helped spread Christianity rapidly east. There were Christians in Merv by at least the 3rd century. Christianity enjoyed great success among the Sogdian communities of Central Asia, and with Sogdian merchants forming the lifeblood of trade connections from Merv through to China, Christianity was spread rapidly across its expanse. Reaching China by the 5th century among Sogdian communities, but Christianity was not a transient mercantile presence. And across this expanse, it was also taken up by local urban communities, and indeed also by the nomadic. In this paper, the extensive evidence for nomadic conversion to East Syrian Christianity will be examined. East Syrian Christianity survived across this range throughout the Middle Ages into the 15th century, and still persevered in local memory into the 17th century. Various historians have suggested that for much of this period, Christians between Syria and China may well have had a demographic majority over those in Europe. And yet this success would seem highly unlikely within the historiographical traditions of much medieval scholarship. Conversion in the period between antiquity and modernity has so often been assumed to have been motivated mainly by political and material factors. And yet the Christian presence in Asia complicates this. The patriarch, the governing head of the Church of the East, was based in the capital of a non-Christian ruler. First in Seleucia Ctesiphon, the Sasanian Persian capital, and then upriver in Baghdad at the court of the Caliph, the secular and religious Islamic head. Across its range, Christianity rarely gained the support of ruling authorities or elites, and was very often subjected to discrimination. Yet Christianity consistently gained new converts. Thus, the question will be asked as to what inspired the conversion of Turco-Mongol nomads. Conversions to Manichaeism and Judaism offer similar complications of unaligned minority religions that enjoyed some success among nomadic groups. and will be approached as comparisons. Instead of conventional political and material factors, I will argue that conversions occurred as a result of demonstrated and accepted spiritual authority, encountered through mystical, visual, emotional, educational, and intellectual experiences. Questions regarding the depth and sincerity of nomadic conversions are often raised. So lastly, I will examine the nature of Christian practice among Turkic nomads, which by the 13th century had come to be shaped by a distinctly Turkic expression, demonstrating a surprising vitality and depth of engagement with the stories that form the substance of Christian belief. There is much evidence for the widespread presence of Christianity among the Turco-Mongol peoples of Central Asia, and I will examine some of the key evidence for conversion in this talk. The first evidence concerns the Hephthalites. From the 5th to 6th century, the Hephthalites, or the White Huns, were a major nomadic power on the border of the Sasanian Empire, who controlled much of Central Asia, from the Tarim Basin across Sogdia as far as Merv. In 497 AD, the deposed Sasanian Shah Kerait had fled to the Hephthalite ruler's court. Accompanying him were two Persian Christian laymen, John of Rashaina and Thomas the Tanner. Among the Hephthalites, they found many of the nomads receptive to Christianity, and they evangelized and baptized a considerable number of Hephthalites. This conversion was recorded in 555 by a near contemporary Syriac author who cites John and Thomas as his personal sources. The success of their mission was seen in that by 549, there were enough Hephthalite Christians to request a bishop, and a bishop was appointed for them from amongst the nomads themselves. In the 7th century, the rise of the Islamic Arab Caliphate, swiftly conquering the Sasanian Empire and pushing on into Transoxiana, caused the collapse of the Sasanians, Hephthalites, and Turkic Khanate, and plunged the region into a period of chaotic turmoil. In the midst of this chaotic milieu, the Syriac Khuzestan Chronicle records another conversion of Turkic nomads at the hands of Elia, the metropolitan of Merv. It records that Elia, metropolitan of Merv, made disciples from the Turki and other peoples in the country around Merv. He met one kinglet who was going to war with another king, and Elia asked him to cease from warfare. In their discussion, the kinglet said to him, "If you show me a sign like the priests of my gods, I would believe in your God." The kinglet's shamans demonstrated their own power in the air, clouds, and wind, and thunder, and lightning pressed hard. Then Elia was moved by divine strength, and Elia made the sign of the heavenly cross, and the illusion constructed by the rebellious demons finished, and they vanished into stillness. When the kinglet realized the thing blessed Elia had done, he fell and worshipped and went to him, and he believed and all of his camp. And he brought them down to one river, and he baptized all of them and established priests and ministers for them, and he returned to his own place, namely Merv. This source itself is again nearly contemporary to the events it describes, with some suggesting that it was even composed by Elia himself. In two letters written in the 790s, so taking a bit of a time leap now, these letters written in the 790s by the prominent patriarch Timothy. He was the first patriarch of the Church of the East to move to the Caliph's court in Baghdad. The foundation of metropolitan, that is the Eastern ecclesiastical equivalent of an archbishop for the Turks, is recorded. The king of Turkey, with more or less all of his possessions, has become familiar with Christianity. He has asked how he might appoint a metropolitan for his realm. Another contemporary source from 850, Thomas of Marga's History of the Monastery of Beth Abbey, the Book of Governors. Beth Abbey is a monastery in northern Iraq. In this, he mentions 3 missionaries sent from the monastery by Patriarch Timothy at about this time. According to Thomas, they were all ordained as metropolitans, along with 7 bishops, and went to barbarian nations at the ends of the East. They are also described as going to a people without wheat, fitting other descriptions of Turco-Mongol nomads. Mark Dickens has convincingly argued that the king of Turkey mentioned by Timothy was the ruler of the nomadic Turkic Qarluqs. a tribal confederation who controlled the area of Jetishu north of the Jaxartes River and the Chu Valley. This is supported by the 10th century Muslim Sharkey's Arabic history of Bukhara, in which he records that following the Islamic conquest of the Qarluqs winter capital of Taraz in 893, its large church was converted into a mosque. Various finds attest to the Christian presence among the Qarluqs, ossuaries, burials, silverware, and the remains of several 8th century churches in the Chu Valley. The last account of nomadic conversion comes from Mari ibn Suleiman's 12th century Arabic Book of the Tower, or Kitab al-Majda, recording a conversion that took place around the year 1007, maybe as late as 1009, of a Turco-Mongol king, probably on the steppe to the north of the Tarim Basin. A king from the Turkic kings became Christian with 200,000 souls. The cause of this was that he lost his way when he went hunting, and while he was bewildered, not knowing what to do, he saw the figure of a man who promised salvation to him. He asked him about his name, and he told him that it was Mar Sergius. He intimated to him to become Christian and said to him, "Close your eyes," and he closed them. When he opened them, he found himself in his camp. He was amazed at this, and he made inquiries concerning Christian religion, prayer, and books of canon law. He was taught the Lord's Prayer, Lakumara, meaning Lord of all, and Kadisha Alafa, Holy God. The Metropolitan told also the Patriarch in Baghdad, so this is the Metropolitan of Merv now, writing to the Patriarch in Baghdad about the conversions being reported to him. So he writes that they had, the king of this Turkic tribe had written to him, is the Metropolitan, on the subject of his going to him, and that he was informed that his people were accustomed to eat only meat and milk. He then goes on at some length to talk about the complications that this diet causes to the Lenten fasting practices and the various adaptations that they'll have to make. Yeah, he references the correspondence of the Metropolitan of Merv for this information. That is Mari ibn Suleiman is referencing the correspondence of the Metropolitan of Merv. The Metropolitan is relaying information about the conversion of this tribe to the Patriarch from the local Sogdian or Uyghur lay Christians who had been teaching the king about Christianity. Gregory Bar Hebraeus, repeating the story in the 13th century, following on from the Mongol conquest, this is the period after the Mongol conquest, he identifies this Mongol king as the ruler of the Kerait, a powerful Christian tribe which was one of the first brought into Genghis Khan's confederacy. The Kerait were one of several largely Christian Mongol tribes, and indeed Kublai Khan's mother was a Kerait Christian, so that's Sogok Tani Beki, and while Kublai's brother Hulagu, the first Ilkhan, had a Kerait wife who played an important role in preserving the Christian community in Baghdad. Many scholars have worked on the basis that political and material considerations were the primary motivators in early medieval conversions. Through the under-examined evidence I have outlined just here, I hope to complicate such assumptions. The conversion of Uyghurs to Manichaeism and Khazars to Judaism, both, as with East Syrian Christianity, lacking any sort of conventional political alignment, these serve as similar examples. The Uyghurs Khanate, then based on the Mongol steppe, began converting to Manichaeism in the 8th century. Manichaeism, a religion that drew together a mixture of Buddhist, Zoroastrian, and Christian elements, had at one time ranged from the Roman Mediterranean, where it had, before his conversion to Christianity, counted Augustine of Hippo among its numbers. And it spread all the way to Tang China, where it persevered long after its disappearance in the Western world. The Uyghur Khan was the only ruler to adopt Manichaeism, and it remained popular among the Uyghurs even after the 9th century breakup of the Uyghur Khanate and their shift towards the Kocho Oasis. The Khazars of the Pontic steppe likewise expressed an affinity with Judaism from 861 to 955. Their Khans adopted Jewish names, while various finds seen here attest to its presence, at least among the elites of the Khazars. Top-down conversions are often associated with political considerations. In the conversions of the Qarluqs, the Kerait, and Elia's kinglet, conversion apparently starts with the king, as it does for the Uyghurs and the Khazars. But with Christianity, Manichaeism, and Judaism lacking outside political backing, whatever political dimension these conversions might possess is not terribly obvious. Nomadic rulers could not simply order the conversion of their people. Ibn Fadlan records that when the Turkic king Inal the Younger converted to Islam, his tribe threatened to depose him. Very similar examples are evidenced on the Pontic steppe, among the ancient Scythians, Huns, and the Mongols of the Golden Horde. A certain degree of receptiveness on behalf of the tribe was crucial to their conversion. Top-down conversion models are not universally, nor perhaps even widely applicable among Christian Turkic nomads. The conversion of the Hephthalites in 497 won many ordinary Hephthalites, but apparently no elites. After the 9th century conversion of the Qarluq king to Islam, Christians persevered in the region until at least the 11th century, while large Turkic Christian communities evidenced there in the 14th century may even represent a longer continuation. 13th century travel accounts attest to the wide-ranging presence of Turkic Christians across Asia, Central Asia, China, all the way to Iraq, while large cemetery finds further demonstrate and confirm this. Uyghurs and other Turkic Christians came to take over the role that the Sogdians had previously played of spreading along the Silk Roads and into these various corners of Asia. Extensive evidence exists for the presence of Christians among the Uyghurs of Kocho and the wider Tarim Basin from at least the 9th century. These include unique finds of Turkic Christian manuscript fragments and church wall paintings. The presence of these Christians speaks of fragmentary conversions of small tribes and family groups, and not of great kings. Consider, writes Thomas of Marga, that not without cause and simply through words divorced from deed, did those barbarian nations bow their necks to the submission of the yoke of fasting and of prayer. It is perhaps a tendency of our own materialistic mindset to reduce motivations to political or material gain. The conversion of thousands of ordinary individuals complicates such reductions. But even the king's motives need not have been so mundane. In the early medieval world, spiritual power exercised on earth as well as transcendentally was valued even higher than political power. Christianity was accepted by Turkic nomads based on its intellectual and emotional value. It is important to be mindful that our knowledge of nomadic conversion is largely mediated through ecclesiastical Syriac texts, however. The active influence and agency of nomads in the conversion process is clearly visible through these sources, and the factors that will be discussed are those which were important to both missionaries and nomads, the spaces of conversion reports and convergent expectations. For a nomad to change cosmology, it was like changing scientific beliefs. Proof was required. Proof existed for them in many forms, through the demonstration of mystical power, signs and wonders, and sacred objects, through the authority of its disseminators, evidenced visually, ritually, and through technological expertise and exemplary living, as well as through intellectual appeals. Nomads abandoned their old beliefs because they weighed Christianity and they found it convincing. So, the reasons for the conversion. The first one, miracles. The demonstration of divine authority through miracles is of central importance in the conversion accounts. The Turkic kinglet reportedly challenged Elia to perform a sign. He says, "If you show me a sign like the priests of my gods, I would believe in your God." Likewise, the king of the Kerait, having become lost in a snowstorm, claimed to have been approached by a vision of Mars Sergius, who mystically transported him back to his camp. The veracity of these divine encounters is beyond the scope of history, but it is important to note that they were expected by both missionaries and the converting nomads. Conversion to a cosmology unable to perform miracles would not happen, and the accounts here contain a clear mixture of expectations from both biblical precedent and shamanic cosmology. Shamans were figures of great authority to the nomads, fulfilling the important role of mediation with the spirit world, protecting against and harnessing predatory spirits in a dangerous and unpredictable natural world, with the pastoralist nomads heavily reliant on fluctuations in the weather, which is considered a very spiritual realm. Elia's kinglet wanted proof that Christ was powerful enough to replace the shamans. This and Mari's account both involve spiritual areas familiar to shamanism in the form of yard or weather magic, with the saint helping him out of the snowstorm, and Elia, the metropolitan of Merv, dispelling the storm that the shamans had whipped up. So the next point, visual splendor. It seems that visual splendor could serve as emotional and evidence of spiritual power. Thomas of Marga believed it was important to mission. Adorned with excellent splendor, Shubal Ishu, this is the missionary in this case, made his entrance, for barbarian nations need to see a little mundane splendor that they might be brought to emulate and draw near through love to Christianity. The Russian Primary Chronicle, which documents the conversion of the near contemporary Rus to Christianity, likewise reports that in the 10th century, Rus envoys to the Byzantine imperial capital of Constantinople were similarly overawed by a service in the Hagia Sophia. We knew not whether we were in heaven or on earth, for on earth there is no such splendor or such beauty. Baghdad must have made a similar impact on the nomadic Qarluq messengers sent by the Qarluq king to Timothy in 790. Al-Ghazali, the 11th century Persian Islamic philosopher, also claimed that the Turks worship beauty. He says, if Turks see a beautiful person or a thing, they fall before it, praying and say, it is our Lord. These sources convey some of the impact of visual splendor to those beyond the centers of Rome, Constantinople, and Baghdad, and the spiritual authority that this splendor reinforced. Education. So educational authority must have been an important part of the nomads' confidence in Christianity. Literacy was particularly valued. For the Hephthalites, the Persian Christian priests taught the art of writing in their own Hunnic language. Among the Mongol tribes, literate Uyghur Christians very often served administrative roles for the Mongol rulers. Literacy education played an important role in Christian outreach amongst the nomads, and in conjunction with Manichaeism, led to Persian, Sogdian, Uyghur, Ongut, Mongolian, and Manchu all adopting Aramaic scripts within this context. For many, it was the first time that they had been properly written down. The Hephthalites were also taught agricultural practices. Christianity was accepted then based in part on the authority of its teachers. The authority of merchants and priests who could read and write was accepted and favored over that of the shamans. Now to turn to the emotional. Emotional authority also appears to have attracted Turkic nomads to Christianity. The sincerity of missionaries' own faith was demonstrated through actions, such as prayer, good works, and particularly fasting. Thomas of Marga again records that the missionaries Yahabala and Kardag made disciples of lost people by the holiness of their way of life and by abstinence from all food. Virtuous living was part of Christian witness, as Thomas records. The daily food of all seven consisted of just 7 loaves. I've skipped a bit. The success of missionaries to the Hephthalites was perhaps also due to their compassion for both the Huns, Christian captives, and the Hun captors alike, and their acceptance of hardship. So this is what is written about the Persian Christians amongst the Hephthalites. Their daily food of all 7 consisted of 7 loaves of bread and a jar of water. They're living amongst the captives here in rather harsh conditions, without usual access to wheat. These missionaries demonstrated the truth of their faith through their lives, emotively encouraging nomads of their authority. To turn to the intellectual. Intellectual appeals seem to have still been key. Disputations played a part in convincing many to convert. Discussion was the first action of the Kerait king. Seeking out the local Christian merchants, he made inquiries concerning Christian religion and books of canon law. While Elia's encounter with the kinglet's shamans is reminiscent of a disputation, with one going up against another to convince the ruler which one is correct. Similar sort of disputations are seen amongst the Rus at this time and also among the Mongols later on. And they seem to have potentially played a part in the conversion of the Khazars and the Uyghurs. Finally, the rational. There is every reason to suppose that the teaching of Christianity appealed both emotionally and rationally to Turkic nomads. There were certain features of Christianity that would have been emotionally accessible and compelling. Eurasian nomads shared a belief in Tengri, a single creator god, but one who was absent, particularly associated with the heavenly realm, the sky, the birds, and the heavens. To these nomads, the basic message of the incarnation could be seen as good news. Tengri, perceived as absent, becoming close and tangible to find lost sheep, highly accessible imagery, offering freedom from the reliance on unpredictable and predatory spirits. In a world of shamanism, incarnation was not hard to grasp. I wish to turn finally then to the nature of Christian practice amongst the Turkic converts. Many nomads were quickly assimilated into the running of their church, bringing a distinctive expression to their devotional culture. Christianity has a history of cultural flexibility, as this group is no doubt fully aware, adopting both Persian and Sogdian as liturgical languages alongside Syriac. Vernacular Turkic was likewise embraced, as Turkic took over from Sogdian as the lingua franca of the Silk Road. This is increasingly evidenced. The influence of Turks within the church helped to shape it. The first bishop of the Hephthalites was himself a Hephthalite convert to Christianity. Both the 10th and to the 13th century Christian manuscript collection from the Turfan Oasis and the gravestone inscriptions from the large 13th century Christian cemetery in the Chu Valley evidence Turkic Christian communities actively engaging with Christian liturgical and storytelling culture. The manuscript evidences the lively work of translation and transmission, while at least 12% of the gravestones from the Chu Valley indicate non-clergy who are in some way engaged with Christian education, either as teachers or as scholars, carrying out the same work of making Christian stories and rituals accessible to Turkic simple believers, translating them and transmitting them into a Turkic cultural expression. In 1281, a Turco-Mongol monk would indeed rise to preside over the Church of the East as Patriarch Yahabala III, indicating the way Turkic Christians came to shape the church, and potentially the part that the Mongol Empire is playing in this. Our sources concur that a central feature of Christianity for Turkic nomads was the Eucharist. It was a key concern of the first priests after baptism. The Kerait ruler's attempt to imitate the Eucharist is particularly intriguing. The Christian laymen he had approached taught him Christian prayers and practices and gave him a gospel, but they clearly also described the Eucharist to him. The king, it says, this is how Mari ibn Suleiman describes it. He says, the king had set up a pavilion to take the place of an altar, in which was a cross and a gospel, and named it after Mar Sergius. And he tethered a mare there, and he takes her milk and lays it on the gospel and the cross, and recites over it the prayers which he has learned, and makes a sign of the cross over it, and he and his people after him take a draught from it. Before the arrival of priests, the king is reported to have erected an altar and celebrated an imitation Eucharist, anointing the cross and gospel with kumis, fermented mesnog. The king is not at this point baptized, neither is he consecrated as a priest. This ceremony in a manner that is remarkably similar to the ritual observed by the 13th century traveller Friar William of Rubric among pagan Mongols, who anointed felt protector effigies with kumis. The record has all the marks of reliability, combining accurate ethnographical information with practices that are perhaps somewhat uncomfortable to a Syriac Christian audience. It is a liminal ceremony in which the king honors the widely recognized sacral objects of Christ, the cross and the gospel, with a ritual rooted in shamanic cosmology. The Eucharist was an accessible source of authority and an attractive one, offering an experience of the sacred and divine completely coherent with shamanic cosmology to the population generally, not just to the shamans. The Eucharist combined all the elements of the nomad's conversion, representing spiritual power visually, tangibly, and experientially, taking the mediating place of shamanism. In Karakorum, the Mongol Khan's capital, Rubric records the tactile response of one Turco-Mongol Christian congregant who received the bread and reverently takes it up out of his palm, which he wipes on his forehead. In the 250 years between the conversion of the Kerait and Rubric's journey, Turco-Mongol understanding of the Eucharist had developed greatly. Two legends among the community in Karakoram, told to William of Rubric, demonstrate a profound engagement with the biblical basis of the Eucharist. He says that they claim to have flour from the bread that the Lord consecrated, and also some of Mary Magdalene's ointment, which they regularly used to bake their bread. Through this first story, the ceremony is directly connected to the Last Supper. They clearly understand the connotations of the Last Supper and that sort of significance that the Eucharist plays. But even more intriguing through this is the connection to Mary Magdalene's oil of nard, referencing Jesus' words that it was poured out to prepare his body for burial. This is not cooking oil, and the connection here makes it clear that they understand that the bread represents the body of Christ. These folk relic stories linking the Eucharist to the Last Supper, Jesus' body, and his death indicate a popular engagement with and well-developed understanding of the gospel through the Eucharist by the time of the 13th century. In conclusion, the underutilized sources on nomadic Christian conversion examined within this paper enable a critique of our assumptions about medieval conversion and practice more generally. These conversions to politically unaffiliated religions complicate the idea of politically and materially motivated conversion. Rational and emotional claims, backed up by the educational and sensory authority of missionaries, go a long way to explaining the declarations of Christian faith by the Turkic nomads. As Barbara York, an Anglo-Saxon historian, has said, the idea that Christianity must have been spread by the powerful discounts that it had intellectual merit as a worldview. It also discounts its emotional and spiritual merit, and the importance of these to nomadic decision-making. Through their assimilation into the church, nomadic Christians came to shape East Syrian Christianity with a distinctly Turkic expression. Central to their continued practice of Christianity, I hope I've shown, was the Eucharist, through which they were able to experience spiritual authority tangibly, experientially, sensually. Conversion is a complex process, mysterious even to observers, let alone to historians, with all our metaphysical and cosmological preconceptions and assumptions. Yet it is my hope that we might still be able to rescue the experiences of ordinary nomadic communities from the enormous condescension of posterity. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, dear Benjamin. I could see that a few people had joined while you were talking. That's what happens during the lunchtime sessions. They come in, and so it's possible that in the questions that you get, they will be referring to points that you mentioned in the beginning. And so all of you, don't be shy. Just if there's anything that you would wish to have clarified by our speaker, then just ask. And I mean, it can only be yes. So Eleanor, yes, I could see you coming in. That's all right. I would like to remind you that I'm recording this session, and I'll be sending it out to all of you as a YouTube recording. Benjamin, if I could just ask one question, just to start this off. You spoke a lot about the connection between the shamanic desire for manifestations from the from nature, or perhaps even this border zone between the between heaven and the sky. So in other words, the spiritual and the natural worlds. But this is also something that you get in Tibet. So if you go just a little bit further down into the across the mountains, across the Tarim Basin, then you're in an environment where Buddhism had to align itself with the Bon religion. And actually the conversion process happened in a very similar way, namely through science. I just wonder whether you've reflected on this or in your research, and whether you've also looked at attempts by these by the Eastern Christians, the Syriac Christians, to establish contacts with Tibet.
Right. Yeah. No. That's very interesting. I do really want to look into the Tibetan side of it. I think that the Church of the East's contact with Tibet are very under researched currently. There are a couple of pieces I can think of on it. One notable thing here is that when Patriarch Timothy is writing about the foundation of a metropolitan of Turkey, he also mentions a metropolitan of Tuptai, which has very often been associated with Tibet, and suggested that this represents a sort of early contact with Tibet. Yeah, I think there probably needs to be a lot more research done into the Church of the East amongst the Tibetans. I think they did have a presence there from the kind of evidence I've seen. And yeah, it must have been a very sort of similar process in many ways with people of sort of similar shamanic beliefs and stuff. The bone stuff is very interesting, and I really want to spend some time getting to know a bit more about that more. I've come across it in the past, and it seemed a very interesting way of adapting these shamanic forms. So no, that's a really good point. Thank you.
Hello, Benjamin. This is Erica Hunter.
Hello.
Erica, yes, go ahead, please. Yes.
First of all, just to pick up on the last point, I've got other points, but on the Tibetans, there has been quite a lot of work done. Ure wrote a very good article on the Christians of Tibet. And of course, Tibet's borders had moved. And in the 9th century, when Patriarch Timothy was consecrating the metropolitan for what he calls the Bet Tuptaye, which we do think are the Tibetans, but it's not absolutely sure, they had taken control of Dunhuang. They were as far west as Dunhuang. So we think, that's only thought, that the metropolitan was at Dunhuang. One mustn't necessarily think of Tibet and Lhasa. It was a much wider expanse, rather like the Armenian borders ebb and wane. But in your very beautifully illustrated talk, and I truly envious of the gorgeous illustrations that accompanied your talk. One word that sprung to mind when I was thinking about your various motives for, of course, the widespread conversion amongst the Turkic tribes from the 4th century onwards, it's a millennium of Christianity amongst the Turkic tribes, is potency. And I wonder where you would place potency as a motive for conversion.
Thank you so much. That's really, really great to hear, and yeah, definitely this event stuff I want to look into more. But no, that's really interesting, the connection with Dunhuang. I hadn't heard that before, so it's really helpful. On potency, yeah, that's really good word, isn't it? I think
if you think of going right back to Constantine, the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, potency, the sign. There's a lot of similarity in the fact that he saw the power in the cross that he used, and with the shamanic encounter, where of course you have the priests, the shamanic priests and the Christian priests, and the Syriac actually does distinguish in the two words, one for a pagan priest and one for a Christian priest. They have very different words for that. It is this, when they perform the Yat ceremony, which I identified many years ago, through the cross, and that potency is what convinced that they had a superior power over the shaman. So potency may not be such a fashionable word these days, but I think that underlying, I mean, of course, there are very different motives, as you mentioned, education being important, etc. But I wonder in the spiritual dimension of potency is something that is quite intangible, but very powerful.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I mean, I must say here, yeah, that I am relying on a lot of your work when looking at this stuff. So yeah,
And
no,
I just have
the Yad
one,
idea is, yeah, sure.
small correction. You mentioned that Persian and Uyghur material was liturgical. Now, we have a lot of Uyghur material, and we have the unique Pahlavi Psalter, but the liturgy, the Psalter is different. The Psalter is translated into a host of languages, showing very rich and varied context. But the liturgy remains in Syriac, and that is extremely, it is the trajectory that links back. I'll send you a recent article that I wrote about historical memory of Seleucia Ctesiphon, the liturgy in Syriac. And we know it was in Syriac because Nicholas Sims Williams and Sebastian Brock published a lovely article on a baptismal fragment where the prompts to the priest are in Sogdian. So,
right, yes. Yes, of course.
Just a small, because that is a really cardinal.
Yes, no, that's a very good point. I suppose to be honest, I'm using material here that I wrote before I dug better into the Turfan stuff. I don't think today I would claim that the Sogdian. Yeah, I was thinking though, I suppose more of I think it's in the Life of John of Dailam. It talks about the Persian being adapted for the liturgy and liturgical.
That could be later, 14th century. And
okay.
I'm working with a German student at the moment on 14th century translations into New Persian. I mean, so much is, we're skating on thin ice, and there are big holes that one can fall into. But we don't have any evidence. There is New Persian at Turfan in pharmacological recipes, and of course the Middle Persian Psalter that is absolutely unique. But there's no evidence at the moment of these languages being used in the liturgy. They're ancillary through the Psalter, and of course the hagiographies are all in Sogdian and not in Syriac, because that's what the monks read. So there are genre divisions by language, which is interesting because that does show some light onto ethnic groups, etc. But the liturgy is Syriac, and I am sure that the Turkic tribes, they may not have even understood what they were reciting, but they would have been taught the Syriac liturgy when he does this wonderful ceremony, the lovely ceremony, which you described, which shows the assimilation to cultural elements, but the power of Syriac in the liturgy.
Well, that's very interesting, because in Mari ibn Suleiman's description of that, even though he's writing in Arabic, I noted that he took the effort to write in the Syriac script the names of the prayers. So, yes, absolutely.
Yes, and his account is much more ethnographically accurate than Bahabreus.
Yes.
It's a much finer account, and it's interesting that he does use that. So I think that they would have taught them. Whether the tribes knew what they were saying might be nothing, but potency is a really important component, not just in Christianity.
Great word, yeah.
Anyway, I do envy your illustrations, very beautiful.
Thank you.
Yes. I should say, actually, to anybody who's not familiar with the topic, and that Professor Hunter's work is very goes into depths that are quite astounding. So this is, if you have any queries, just look her up on the contact her, of course. But
I'm Dr. Hunter, not
Dr. Hunter. Well, it's the same. In China, you would be Jiao, you would be professor. So it's that's so. Anyway, so this is, but there is a lot that's been written, and much of it is from the nib of Dr. Erika Hunter. So you just do look out for her publications. I'm aware that the time is slowly advancing, and people are being asked to go back to work at 2 o'clock. So any other questions? Perhaps on the script, because that is, of course, something that people, certain people who study Manchu, for example, are looking at with big eyes. Anyone who would like to ask something from, yes, any perspective that we have neglected so far?
Well, I don't want to hog the session, Lars.
But go ahead, go ahead. Yes, that's all right. Yes.
Obviously, Benjamin's point about education, of course, the writing of the Syriac script, and I've just done an excruciatingly painful article on looking at paleography from the Turfan, what we think are local Turfan manuscripts. Mm-hmm. Of course, the scribal education and the writing of the Syriac was a major innovation in the fact of transferring what must have been oral languages into a written form, and of course they use the Syriac script, and it is well, it transcends religion, of course, so this is a major achievement. So your point about education is an extremely important one, because and that would have also had potency and power. So of course it's very well known that, you know, the script spread through these probably previously illiterate tribes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of very similar to how Greek and Latin proliferate as well, these kind of scripts. They're just, yeah, I don't know, there seems to be yeah, as you say, a potency about these languages of Christianity. And I really think the effect of yeah, writing and that sort of thing would have been just as powerful as or maybe just, I mean, probably a little less so, but then going to these big cities and seeing these huge churches and splendor, like it's something that's not familiar to them. And yeah, this, and you can see through the reverence that the king pays to the gospel, I suppose. Yeah.
Well, that's right. And it's interesting that when Rubric came to the court of Karakorum, he brought with a psalter, and that's really interesting. I'm sorry, I can't remember. You might remember whether the psalter was in Syriac or Latin or another language. But it's interesting that he took the psalter, you know, yeah, a book. And what's interesting, and it's on a completely different dimension, when the Mongols sacked Baghdad in 1258, they threw all the books in the river of the Caliph's library. And I've actually seen some of them that were fished out with their watermarks still in life.
Wow.
The Old Gailani Mosque in library in Baghdad. 60 years later, and if you go to the BL, you will see the most gorgeously illuminated Quran. The Mongols, of course, had converted, but they had also realized the power of writing and the book. And so you have one of the most luxurious Qurans, and that's a 60-year lifespan from people who threw out the books, you know, chucked them out, they were useless. So I think that's something to keep in mind about the power of education, the power of writing.
Definitely.
And if I could just add, if we go north, so I went south early on to Tibet, but if we go into Russia, into the, you know, you mentioned the Rus early on, they go through a very similar process, actually, yeah, around that time, because they convert from a sky nature shamanic tradition to one where the written word is represents power, yes, potency. That's certainly true, and this is before the rise of the Mongols. The writing gives them the structure. It gives them access to the structure of the power that the state then borrows. So this is a very interesting aspect. So I think, yes, Erica's remarks are completely, they're spot on. There's no, you can't separate them. The two belong together. And then, of course, to anyone who's seen the Syriac writing standing on in columns, coming in columns, this is later what the Uyghurs do. They pass this knowledge on to the Mongols, and the Mongols, they're not actually, they don't exist as a separate nation yet, Ulus. That doesn't exist yet. So you have tribes that sort of cluster, and where the point where they are referred to them, where they refer to themselves as Turks, the point where they refer to themselves as Mongols is a very fluid one. And again, there's a lot that goes that's in between legend and firm historical proof. And the only way that you can actually say for certain that they belong to either the Mongol or the Turkic side is when they start writing, because then that's when the words become, the vernacular becomes clear.
Wonderful. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
More, please, people in the audience, please don't ask anything.
Well, I'll just pick up on another point. I mean, if someone else would like to comment, I'm very happy to keep quiet. In the story which Mari ibn Suleiman and Gregory Bar-Hebraeus both relate, what is interesting, and I wrote a long time ago an article that I thought that Gregory had interpolated the term Kerait, because of course he was writing at a time, and this might, why I'm saying is it might have some bearing on the question of political profiles, because of course when he was writing, the Mongols were established as the Ilkhanate, and of course the considerable Kerait presence, particularly amongst the women. And actually this is very interesting, it's a sideline, I won't go down that track today, but the Church of the East has quite a distinguished female presence through that often is overlooked. But anyway, there was considerable Kerait presence. You mentioned Sarakhtani, who was Kerait and produced 3 major emperors amongst her 4 sons. And Christopher Atwood thinks also that they weren't the Kerait. It was he thinks that they were the Ongud, etc. So it's interesting that Gregory Bar-Hebraeus has interpolated the sort of current Turkic political notion, if I put it into those terms, into a story that clearly has a Turkic background, but probably not the Kerait.
Yeah, I read the article, and I would have talked more about that had I had more time. Actually, it's very interesting, and I think really, like you see elsewhere in Bar-Hebraeus' work that he engages.
What I'm trying to say is that Gregory is really influenced by the politics in which were contemporary to him, and the Kerait were the known entity, and the same as you mentioned later on, the election of Yaballaha III. I mean, quite extraordinary that you have these, and he didn't know Syriac by his own profession, according to the writings. Oh, he didn't know it well. He wasn't a native speaker. So you have this political dimension of the Turks coming into the Church of the East, and that's worthy of further exploration.
I think so. Absolutely. No, thank you.
Christine, Shayu, you look you look as if you wanted to ask a question. No?
I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you. Yes.
No, I just have a little comment about the use you made of 2 words, emotional and rational. In connection, you spoke of fasting, of communion, and I would prefer that you would use words like spiritual or ascetic life, because I'm not happy with this word emotional. Why not put together the 2 notions, emotional and rational, in one concept, that is spiritual or ascetic life? But it's just a little comment.
Interesting. Yeah. No, that's very interesting. I suppose what I'm trying to use words that I haven't seen used before, just because I feel spiritual can often be a rather nebulous and misused term kind of thing. So
we are in the context of the church. We are in the context of the church. So I don't think you have to put it in the context of the church, not in a nebulous context. But this is my approach because I write about these topics. So about these words.
Thank you very much,
That's
yes.
up to you.
Yes. Yitong, you have a question? Yes.
Sorry?
No. Yitong, we have the next speaker. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I thank you so much for the presentation. Your study educated me a lot about this issue, and I'm not a historian of the Mongolia, but a historian of a much later time period of the 16th century Qing. And I have a question that, well, it might be hard to answer, but how much did Christian had an impact on the Mongolian population during that time? Do you have maybe an estimation of the percentage of population that were influenced by Christianity, or maybe how many people converted? Just a very,
No.
There's no way of getting a population estimation. It's very, very hard to tell. These small communities are large communities, I don't know. And we know that like there are these Mongol tribes that are Christian, but how Christian are they? Is it just the elites, or is it like the whole tribe? I don't know. So it's very, very hard to tell. I mean, I'm sure, Eric can say more, but it's it's not obvious at all what kind of percentage of populations.
How many stars are in the sky?
I see.
It's inestimable. You just don't know.
Yeah.
Yes.
Of course, it's very important to realize that Christianity, as Ben has shown very well, is one of a number of religions in the region. Manichaeism, further west Judaism, of course, and there's evidence, sporadic evidence of Jews across Central Asia, probably primarily in trade roles, and of course there is further east in China, of course, which Lars can tell you all about, the Chinese religion. So it's very important to realize, and of course then there are the shamanic expressions that have been so underestimated. So it's important to realize that it's not a homogeneous or dominant religion, but we just don't know patterns.
Yeah, you do get accounts of individual converts, often to Islam, where it's easy to see because they tend to change their names, and it's not really at home in this early period. But if you go on the other side of the Mongol era, so into the Ming, early Qing, then late Ming, then you do get amongst the peoples of northeastern Asia. So that would be the Jurchen, it would be the Evenks, maybe. You get people who had arrived from further in the West, and they came with religious ideas, and sometimes they change their names. And the most obvious way is when they change their name into an Arabic one, because that usually means that they've become Muslims. But you don't get mass conversion, as far as I know.
Thank you. Thank you for.
Could I have one question?
Yes, please.
So, yes, I'm not a specialist of Eastern Christians in China. However, I'd like to ask you about the Japanese monks coming to China, particularly the 8th century onward. And there are a lot of Japanese monks came up to China to learn Buddhism. However, they are very much interested in Eastern Christianity, the Nestorianism. And they brought back some ideas to Japan as well. And I wonder what kind of the teaching of Eastern Christianity attracted these Buddhist monks from Japan. I'm sorry, could you hear me?
Sorry,
Yeah.
Sorry, I think I lost Wi-Fi there quickly.
Sorry. You couldn't get my question?
I got most of it, I think. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I can't speak too much to this. I know it's a very interesting instance of the Bishop Alapen in Shan, who is also helping. Oh no, I'm getting a bit confused. No, there's the Christian who translates the Shan stele. Is he called Xing or Adam? I think in two different times. He is supposedly also helping one of the local Buddhist missionaries to translate their stuff into Chinese. I don't know. I really couldn't speak more than that though on it. I'm not sure.
Thank you, because there are a couple of articles, but there's not deep studies in it. So therefore, I'm very much curious about it. Anyway, thank you.
Noriko,
yes?
you might want to read. Do you read German?
Yes, I can. Yes.
Yes. There is a very, very good and recent book by Max Deeg, D-E-E-G, who is a great Buddhist scholar, as well as an authority on the Church of the East.
Mm-hmm.
He's written a book on the Xi'an Fu stele, looking at the Buddhist elements in that Chinese front, which, I mean, we're straying a long way from Ben Benjamin's paper on the nomadic tribes, because we are in a court culture at Chang'an, and Max Deeg does, if you look up under his name, it will come out. Yes. Maybe Lars, you can do a Google search.
Yes, I've ordered it for SOAS, so it's on its way. but
and that will give you a very in-depth discussion by a person who he's a German scholar who's familiar with both Buddhism and Christianity. There is definitely some overlap between the two religions in terms of concepts, etc. And what I find interesting, and Lars could comment on this more, when the emperor was presented with translations of various works, and here we are into an imperial court culture quite divorced from nomadic tribes, and he examined them, or probably his courtiers examined them. He said, yes, this is a harmonious religion. And that's a really interesting comment to make, because the concept of harmony. Whereas, so Noriko, I would suggest, I mean, it's a great question that you ask, but it's a complicated question. Have a look at Max Deeg.
Yes, I will. Thank you so much, Erica.
Yeah, that's a pleasure. Nice to speak with you.
Yes.
Good to you. Yes.
Yes, it's one of the advantages of, perhaps the only advantage of the COVID crisis, that we can actually speak across the continents. But anyway, and even from Cambridge and Oxford to London, that's not so doesn't happen so often. But what I would like to do after the end of the COVID crisis is to have the seminars on a hybrid basis, so that we have a camera and a microphone, so that we can actually transfer the transmit. That's it. The sessions to people who can't be here. Yes. So Noriko, of course, thank you. I'm very grateful for your comments. I look up the title. I'll send it to you then. Okay. And then.
Thank you.
Yes. Any other questions? A few people have already left. No. Yes, yes. My comment was that would have been that that visitors from the East, and that includes also Korea, that they frequently observed the, tendencies that were new in China, because China meant that was already the West. So everything that arrived along the routes, the caravan routes, and arrived in Chang'an and in the Luoyang and even further, you know, Hangzhou, definitely, that was news from not just you know, the far West. It was also news from the known world, so the Buddhist world. So this was it was very important for them to transmit this this information. And the same goes for Confucianism, of course. New tendencies in the philosophical discourse of China at that point. So you can be certain that anything that was observed by them would also have been written down and taken back into Korea and Japan. More questions? Anyone? No. Okay. So Benjamin, thank you so much. This was very enjoyable. Erika, Noriko, with your knowledge, you know, you enriched this tremendously.
Thank you so much. Yes.
Christine, the same to you. I'm grateful that you joined in, and then all the others who came and who've already left. I'm going to send this recording to you, and I'll be in touch very soon again. So thank you very much for taking the time to join this session here with Benjamin Sharkey. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone. Bye. Bye-bye.